Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. I'd like to thank everyone for attending our webinar this morning. Um, Excited to have everyone here. I'm very passionate about the dental industry. I grew up in a dental family. My dad was a practicing periodontist for over 40 years. My wife, um, her father was a dentist for over 40 years as well. And ironically, they were in the same dental school class. So obviously, my whole family's been surrounded by dentists their entire lives. And our firm, Allegiance, is very passionate about working with the dental profession. And so, what we're trying to do today is just add value. There's so much around our profession that involves other things besides investments. We clearly work with retirement planning, cash flow, financial planning, but this topic today is extremely important. Uh, you know, there's so many folks that go through their career who don't ever really understand how to um, uh, as far as come up with a succession plan from a transition plan, or even as it relates today to from a valuation standpoint. I will say this, that I think it's imperative that most folks, if they're looking at any type of valuation or transition, that they start now. Even if it's 7 to 10 years out, it's very important to start having these conversations to obviously take what's best for you and your family. So we're here today with a great panel. I'm really excited to be here, and we're here only to add value. Asaf?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Asaf Pinchas, and I'm a partner here at Allegiance Financial Group Advisory Services. I have 29 years of experience as a financial advisor, and for 22 of those, I've been a certified financial planner. Charlie and I, along with our third partner, Sean Williamson, really pride ourselves on helping our clients achieve what matters most to them, and being very comprehensive in our wealth management approach. We do that by working with a team of experts, such as attorneys, CPAs, valuation experts. In fact, our speakers today are part of that team of experts, and we collaborate with these experts on behalf of our clients in our financial planning process. Recently, I've had the opportunity to help one of our dental clients go through a transition, and I was involved in every part of the process, from assessing whether the time was right to sell the practice, which is something we actually spoke about for really years before the sale actually took place, to working with the CPAs of the dental practice in assessing the financials of the firm and being able to present them in the most advantageous way to potential buyers in order to maximize value, to being part of the negotiations with various buyers as they bid against each other, again, trying to maximize the value of the firm. And once the deal came to fruition, being involved with the attorneys and tax professionals in order to protect the interests of our client, and help them shelter as much of the tax burden that was a result of selling the practice. And so we really help the client in every stage of that process, because we're involved in their financial planning. We know what their goals are, what's important to them. We can really add value in every part of that process. And then sometimes we meet with clients with other dentists that in assessing that, and we decide together that it's not the right time to sell the practice. So really, our goal is to help our clients make informed decisions that will be best for them and their family. I'll bring Charlie back on to introduce our speakers and go through the agenda.
I think we're very fortunate to have Tom and Chuck on the call with us today. I can personally say this. I've worked with Tom and Chuck on a case or two, and the clients that I have worked with that have touched base with Tom and Chuck have been extremely satisfied. Again, we're just trying to educate. We're trying to add value, and these guys have a lot of experience. Both Chuck and Tom have over 20 years of experience, either through valuations or transitions, but specifically in the dental space. So I think that's very important. I think that's why this topic today is very interesting to hopefully everyone here. it doesn't matter if you're just starting your career somewhere in the middle or towards the end. It's nice to know where you stand. It's nice to know what your options are. And Tom and Chuck both have experience in this field, which again I really appreciate, and I have personally worked with them, and I can't say enough. So, guys, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So I'm Chuck Laverty. I am living in Poland, Ohio, which is right on the border of Pennsylvania, Ohio. My background is went to college for accounting, went into a boutique business valuation firm, and have been doing business valuation and business consulting for the last 24 years. So my expertise is from a valuation perspective and an exit planning, succession planning perspective, and have managed or prepared 2,000 different types of valuations, a lot of dental practices and dental clients. Specifically in the last 3 years, we've gotten a lot of calls from dentists and dental groups on looking at some sort of an exit strategy. So we're getting probably 5 to 10 calls a month just from different clinicians just asking about that process.
And I'm Tom Bodin here in Indianapolis, Indiana. Work very closely with Chuck. My background, I was, kind of started getting into finance when I was doing my master's. I am a CFP and a CFA, but have worked in the dental industry here for the past probably about 10 plus years as a practice integration advisor. So Chuck's expertise as a business on the business valuation side of things, my expertise is in fractional CFO support to dentists. As Asaf was mentioning, in terms of some of the different tools you have when it comes to the value of your practice, my experience is specific in the dental world on enhancing that value, helping owners understand, what is the practice as an asset? What does the P&L look like? How do we make this something that is attractive to an outside group? And then working with clients over the years in their transition strategies. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that we're unpacking today is Chuck goes through all of the elements of why do you get a valuation? What does valuation mean? What are the uses of it? And what's the process? I'll come in at the end to talk about dental specific. What are the 5 common transition models in dentistry? Where are they appropriate? And depending on what your time frame is and your desired clinical outcome, what might be the right model to pursue? So hopefully between the two, we'll be able to provide you some kind of deep knowledge in terms of dental transitions and the valuation process today. Thank you, Chuck.
Let's start with talking about where we're at in the industry. And we've received a lot of calls in the last 3 years, as I said, from various types of business owners, a lot of dental groups, dental practices, just asking about some sort of an exit or a succession plan. And I will tell you that this has increased substantially since the pandemic. A lot of our business owners we've talked to in the past were looking at maybe a 5, 10, 15-year time frame for an exit or some sort of transition. And I think the pandemic has sped that up significantly because those same business owners we've talked to have now said, okay, yeah, I want out in 2 or 3 years because 2020 was tough. 21 was tough digging out of the pandemic, and even into 2022. So they're tired. They want to figure out some sort of an exit strategy. And we're having multiple conversations with the owners on, okay, is it 1, 2, 3 years versus 5 or 10 years out? So let's go into some just what is a succession or an exit plan. It's an integrated approach that helps you address all your business issues, your personal concerns, legal issues. There's a lot of legal discussions in this process. We talk about financial issues, right? Plugging numbers into a retirement plan analysis, making sure that if you exit your practice, how that impacts your retirement when you shut off that income stream and you're getting a lump sum of cash, hopefully for the practice. How does that impact you financially? So you have to work with your advisor on that. And we're doing it as a team, making sure that you're protected when you do exit or transition the business. We're talking about tax implications through this process. You'll see in a couple slides that it's not Chuck or Tom, the only individuals and advisors, or Charlie and Asaf as the only advisors involved in this. It's a multidisciplinary approach. You have to use a team. Sometimes you got to get tax professionals in. Sometimes you got to make sure You're looking at the value of your practice might be worth a couple mil, but when you tax affect it, everybody's got to pay taxes on any sort of transition. How does that impact you personally? And what are you really walking away with? We're looking at insurance issues. Are you protected by insurance if something were to happen to you? Are you adequately funded to make sure that you're addressing all the key person and all those insurance needs? And then the last bullet point is just planning for an unexpected event. The number of times that I get a call or an email or just a client reaching out, hey, I've had some health issues. My exit has been accelerated significantly. We need to make sure that we're planned for that. You don't want it to be, I had a stroke or somebody died or became disabled or going through some personal stuff, and now you're forced into exiting your business. You want to make sure that you plan for those types of events. So if it does happen, that we are appropriately planned for it and we can work through it together as a team. I think it was Charlie when he opened up and said, you need to start planning 5 to 10 years. You do. You need to start planning 3, 5, 10 years in advance of exiting so that you can appropriately accomplish what your goals and objectives are, and we can meet those in a timely fashion. So if you're trying to do it next year, you're probably late in the game. It's never too late, but you want to make sure you plan in advance for this. So this is the largest transition of wealth in the history, and it's already started. And it started years and years ago when the first baby boomer started entering that retirement age. That was in 2011, the first baby boomer turned 65. 10,000 baby boomers turned 65 daily. It's a huge number. 70, almost 80 million of baby boomers in the US are between the ages of 57 and 75. And it represents almost 30% of the total US population. It's a huge number. And we could see this shift of wealth coming because the baby boomers are entering that retirement phase and they're looking for some sort of exit strategy. So if you're in those numbers, you're probably thinking about what your exit looks. If you're 50 years old and slightly below that 57, 75 range, you still need to appropriately plan, because you want to get rid of all those bullet points in the previous slide. You want to appropriately plan for the exit and succession of your practice. 90% of a business owner's personal wealth is tied up in their business. That is a huge number. If you're banking on your retirement to be through the sale or exit of your practice, if it's a significant portion of your retirement, you want to make sure you get the maximum value for that practice and put good numbers into your retirement analysis. Because I can tell you horror stories of a client who thought his practice was worth $5 million, it came back worth $2 million, but he put in his retirement analysis with his advisor $5 million, and he never sold it for $5 million. He ended up getting $1.5 million due to some health issues as well. So, putting in accurate numbers, going through the process appropriately. If you're banking on the sale or exit of your business to fund your retirement lifestyle, you want to make sure that you have the right experts in place. 75% of businesses are going to transition over the next 10 years, 50% in the next 5 years. Huge numbers, huge numbers. 66% of business owners are not familiar with their exit options. That is a scary statistic. And the reason is because they don't know. Are they going to sell to a DSO? And Tom will go through this at the end in his presentation about the different exit options you have. You're going to transition it to a partner. You're going to transition it to a young person coming right out of college. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with your options, because if you don't know what your options are, you could be missing out significant opportunities. 56% of business owners felt they had a good idea of what the business was worth, but only 18% have had some sort of valuation performed in the last 2 years. That is a scary number when 56% think they have an idea of what it's worth, but only 18% have worked with the appropriate experts to identify, is that number a real number, or is it just, I heard my buddy's practice sold for X times EBITDA, or X times this, and we're just going to apply it to our numbers. You could be missing out on some significant opportunities to, if it's not worth that, work with the right individuals. Tom and I do a ton of value enhancement engagements with practice owners to make sure, okay, it's not worth this, but how do we focus on things that drive that value up in a couple of years. So when you're ready to exit, you've maximized your value, you utilize the appropriate experts to drive that value up. So working with the experts, there's a cost to everything. So nothing is free, but at the same time, to spend a little bit of money to grow your practice and exit it appropriately and get the right advice, it's worth every penny you're going to spend. This is a big statistic. 12 months after selling a business, practice, any type of business, the owners, 75% of owners regretted selling their business because it did not achieve their personal, financial, or business goals. So I can tell you, you hear all these horror stories about DSOs and people selling to DSOs and they're miserable and they're held to these standards. Things will change when you sell your business. But the goal is to find the right buyer that accomplishes what you want to accomplish. If it's getting the highest price, then we will work towards getting you to that direction and make sure you are aware that if you do sell to a DSO, here's what they're going to expect. If you're transitioning to children or key employees or other partners, we want to make sure that that deal is structured a certain way that you are not in that 75% regretting selling. We want that number to be really low so that you're extremely happy. So while I say when you're exiting or transitioning your business, you need to find the right buyer and make sure that the agreements and terms are appropriate for you as well. So this is a big statistic as the last one, the generational transitions, right? A lot of owners talk about transitioning it to the next generation. Well, when you do that, there is a big failure rate on these. 30% of family-owned businesses survive to the second generation. 12% survive to the third, and 3% into the fourth. And if you think of it, I have a 9-year-old boy and a 6-year-old boy. The reason the statistics are against you when you're transitioning to the generation, and get it, I know, I'm well aware that business owners and practices do sometimes transition to the next generation. But I cannot tell you what my 9 and 6-year-old boys are going to want to do in the next 15 years. They might not want to do valuation and business consulting. They might want to practice dentistry. They might want to be a surgeon. They might do a trade. But you can't force a kid or any of your children into a role that might set them up to fail. So when you're looking at a generational transfer, the statistics are against you. And they get worse as you go through more generations, just because we don't know what the next generation is going to want to do. So succession and an exit plan is going to happen. Whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, you are going to exit your practice. 50% of those exits are from a planned retirement. Our owners know exactly when they want to exit the business. We're going to do it on this date. But the other 50 are from what we call the 5 Ds. Somebody's died, somebody became disabled, somebody went through a divorce. Doesn't mean a spousal divorce, could be a partner divorce. Partners do fight. I've seen a lot of it. A distressed business. In 2020, this was a huge issue for a lot of our practice owners who were looking at exiting in 2020. The pandemic hit. Guess what happened to their value? Guess what happened to the buyers? The buyers literally just backed off and said, well, we don't know what's going to happen in 21, 22. But now that we're a couple of years past that, that distressed business has eased significantly. But it's, another pandemic, another issue could cause that distressed business D part of it to come in. And then the last one's just a disagreement. Partners disagree. They don't always agree on everything. So when you have this huge disagreement, could cause a dissolution of a partnership, could cause some issues on the succession and an exit plan. So what we want to do is educate you all to get you away from being into that 5 Ds. We don't want to get a call and say, hey, my partner died. I didn't have a buy-sell agreement in place. I have to buy it out. I'm now partners with his or her spouse. That's not what we need. We want to get away from the 5 Ds and have our business owners leave on a voluntary term versus involuntary. We don't want you to be reactive to a situation. We want you to be proactive and get away from those 5 Ds and move that 50% from planned retirement up to 90 to 100%. That's our goal. As I stated earlier, no single advisor can have the expertise or knowledge to do everything. So we have to utilize a team approach, help you value your practice, maximize the value of your practice, do some tax planning, not only from a wealth advisory thing, as Charlie and Soft really focus on that that tax strategies, make sure you pay the least amount and be very tax focused on your investments. You do the same thing when you're selling your business. You have to have the tax expertise in place, making sure that you're looking at that. Legal advice, estate planning. Right now, estate planning is, the limits are 26 million, but they're talking about in 2026, possibly going back to 5 million per individual. So 10 million a married couple. You have a really successful practice that you plop a lump sum of money in. Right now, it might not impact a lot of our clients' estate plan, but if they change the limits to 5, there's been talk maybe even down to 1 or 2. They change those numbers to those lower levels, almost every one of our clients will have some sort of an estate issue. So you want to make sure that you do some estate planning, utilize the right individuals there, using the appropriate wealth advisor to help you. You're going to get a liquid asset now. You turn this thing into cash. You want to make sure you manage it appropriately. You want to make sure you go through the process of having the right individual looking out for you in the future, because you're turning off that income stream and now taking a lump sum of cash. And you want to make sure you don't run out of money in retirement. That is a worst case scenario. You sell your practice and I lived the 90s and I don't have any money. That's a terrible situation to be in. So we have to use a team approach. Sometimes we use life coaches. One of the biggest things you'll see in this next slide is that 4th bullet point down. Why would you need a life coach? Because a significant amount of why owners do not plan for the future is they're afraid of what is life without the business. You've dumped 30, 40, 50 years into your practice, and now all of a sudden you might have a 1 or 2 or 3 year employment agreement afterwards, and then you're out of the practice. What are you going to do with your time? Now, I have clients who say, I'm just going to golf. Well, you physically can't golf every single day, because even after you back out 6, 8 hours for sleep, you still have 100 hours left, because golf is only taking 5 to 7 hours of your day. And can you physically golf every day? I mean, I'm 48. I don't know if I could physically golf every day. I would love to, but there are things in there that once you exit your practice, the significant amount of why owners don't plan is they're afraid of, what am I going to do with my time? So some other reasons for not planning: not sure to how to start the process. This is why we're doing these types of educational events, is to have practice owners understand there's a process out there, and just reach out and we can help you through that process. Owners have difficulty discussing financial matters or personal goals. I will tell you the number of times that I've heard more personal stuff from an owner. I call myself an unlicensed therapist. Their tax accountant, their audit accountant, whatever, their closest friends, sometimes spouses, don't even hear the stuff that we hear, that, hey, this is what's keeping me up at night. And you have to apply all of that into this entire process. The process seems too difficult. It is very extensive, but it is difficult, but you need to start. And then there's something called the 5-year plan. Well, I'm gonna look at this in 5 years, and then 5 years goes by. I'm gonna look at it in 5 years from then. And next thing you know, you're 10 years. I've had a client who for 15 years has told me I'm gonna start it in 5 years. And I keep reminding them, you said that 10 years ago at 5-year increments. And that's usually what happens. They just kick the can down the road 5 years, and then one of those 5 Ds hits and they haven't done any appropriate planning. And the last one is cost. What is this going to cost? Every expert's going to have their costs, but I tell my clients all the time, it's much more expensive to do nothing than to pay the expert the cost to get you to where you need to be. You pay a little bit of cost versus losing a significant amount of cost if you do nothing. And then what we're trying to do in this entire process is bridge the gap. Most business owners and practice owners think that they know what the value of their practice is worth. But what if you miss that? What if you're lower than what you think it's worth? Then you have a value gap. So first thing is, are you operating profitably? And are you maximizing your profits? And Tom and I go through a huge analysis to say, hey, there's opportunities for you to enhance your business, your profitability. If you do that, then you increase your value. But 9 times out of 10, a business owner thinks they're operating profitably and they're not. So that turns into a valuation gap. They think it's worth 5, it's only worth 2 in that example I showed earlier, talked about earlier. Now, you think it's worth 5, it's only worth 2, that translates to a wealth gap. So you have these huge gaps where you're not operating effectively, you have a huge valuation issue, which ends up leading into a wealth gap. So you want to make sure we bridge those three gaps. By doing that, you have an appropriate plan in place, you set realistic numbers, expectations, you've enhanced the practice to its fullest, and then we put the right numbers in with your wealth advisor. And now I'll turn it over to Tom to talk about the actual transitions, what your options are, and the valuation process, because we do a ton of this stuff on a daily basis.
Greatly appreciate that, Chuck. Before I really start to dive in on the dental transition, wanted to make just a real quick plug for why get a valuation, even if we're not ready to immediately jump into the transition planning process. Chuck had brought up two really important aspects that I want kind of everybody in the audience to think about. First is, are we appropriately planning for your practice as an asset? The practice that you have is going to change over time with the cash flow of the practice. And we'll get into those individual valuation approaches so that you get a better understanding what that means and what that looks like. But when you're working with when you're working with Charlie, when you're working with Asaf, part of what you want to make sure that you're doing in your long-term financial plan is really accounting for what is the business worth, what does the exit strategy, the transition do to get you to financial freedom. Having that as an informed data point, really, there's no too early to start to incorporate that. The other aspect that I wanted to plug in terms of what this process can look like is related to the 5 Ds. Chuck talked through just all of those items that become an unplanned transition or an unplanned exit. The value of your practice is reliant on the cash flow of your practice. The cash flow of your practice is reliant on your patients and the patients that you serve. Being an ongoing clinical entity is what provides the practice the value that you're going to see as we go through valuation processes. We have the process of going through and working with clinician owners for office coverage agreements and incapacity checklists. When we understand the value of our practice, we can have some different tools in there that if God forbid the worst were to happen, we might not be able to maximize the value of the practice, but we can certainly come in to help ensure that we do not minimize the value of the practice to your family by having a predetermined step into place transition strategy that, again, needs to be based off of the valuation of the practice, needs to fit into your plan. But some things why I'd say let's engage in this conversation early. Now let's turn to those planned exits and what the dental transition really looks like. So when we're talking dental transitions, really looking at kind of 2 areas where we use that terminology, practice transition. First is when we bring in the additional owner, when we bring in the change of ownership. The second is going to be an additional producer. So when we're looking at bringing in an associate, ultimately, any of those 2 events are ultimately going to significantly impact the value of your practice. So, Chuck had touched on a lot of these issues just from the valuation perspective. But when we're looking at it from a practice transition, as I start to get into the different transition models that are available to you as a clinician, the financial aspect is only one of the aspects that we want to really make sure we're incorporating into your transition plan. The physicality. Dentistry is a physically intensive business. A lot of times the disability issues can come into play, or just the general, exhaustion issues can come into play. So ensuring that we're looking at our quality of life, work-life balance, and how does that fit into the transition model that is most appropriate for you. We see some doctors that want to get out of the clinical side, but remain in the business. There's some transition models that support that type of approach. We see some that want to get out of having to manage a small business, but are still really engaged in the clinical care for their patients. There's transition models that facilitate that. And of course, we also see oftentimes that we're done with it. We are ready to retire, and we have thought through what that really looks like. As Chuck mentioned in one of the books that I like for kind of thinking about transitions is retirementology. The concept of retiring to something, not away from something. As we start to approach transition, do want to make sure we're looking at not just how do we sprint to the finish line from a financial aspect so that we are able to maximize the value of our practice, but are we truly ready to be on the other side of that transition? When you start down this process, understanding where it's going to lead really should be dictated by where you want this to lead to. Anytime that we've seen transitions go off the rails, it is generally because there's a lack of equitability or understanding of what both sides' needs are. The most successful transitions that we work through are those where we've got really kind of a mutually beneficial understanding of what does the outcome look like and does it satisfy what the buyer's looking for and the seller. The majority of people on this call are likely going to be sellers. So having an understanding of a buyer and a buyer's concern will help you be able to position your practice, position your P&L, position the value of your practice to be the most attractive to the highest number of buyers. As Asaf was talking about at the start of this call, one of the best things you can have when it comes to selling your practice is a bidding war. So knowing that, knowing whom you're trying to sell to and what their needs are is going to be important. We'll talk about the DSO side of things somewhat separately, but if we're selling to another clinician, making sure that there's an understanding of what are their financial needs, how does the cash flow from the practice meet those? Is it a good fit? There's an aspect to when you sell your practice, that's going to be part of your legacy in the community. Understanding what clinically is your differentiator, what from a patient experience is your differentiator, all those and ensuring that fit with the buyer help really ensure that you've got that best long-term strategy. The buyer also needs to understand that they can get financing for the purchase. Far too often what I hear, because we have so many young dentists with such a high amount of dental school debt, oftentimes I hear them saying, I cannot borrow to buy a practice because of the debt I have. We need buyers to understand the cash flow that the practice provides. The loan is for buying the practice. The loan isn't for the dentist themselves personally. So if we've got a good valuation, strong cash flow, and it's a reasonable expectation, the banker ultimately is going to look at that as being a very safe loan. Vets and dentists are like the two best in terms of paying off their loans. Is the valuation reasonable? And who will guide you through the process? So both sides need to have an understanding of that. The seller also needs to make sure that this opportunity meets the needs of the buyer. That value is primarily based off of current cash flow. We'll get into the valuation methodologies, but I do hear from owners that there's a desire to start to slow down and then we'll sell the practice. That is going to erode the value of your practice significantly. Kind of the better strategy is sell at a sprint and work back at a lifestyle. And we'll talk about those transition models. Will the outcome of the sale meet your personal needs? And it's beyond that financial. As Chuck was saying, there's only so many days in the week you're going to want to golf. So understanding what's next and what are you working towards is going to help. And buyers and sellers, again, who is going to guide you through the process? Because it's complicated. You really only have one chance to sell your business. The vast majority of business owners only have one business to sell. We want to make sure that the value is optimized. We want to make sure that the process is appropriate for you. And we want to make sure that it's handled in a way that really gets you to your finish line. So what we have here are the 5 transition models that all dental practices are going to go through. They're kind of some catch-all pieces in here. The first is the sale and walk away. For those practices that are one clinician, one owner, and we're producing $1.25 million, $1 million, it's really hard to share any of that production collections with another associate and have that provide a meaningful financial outcome. Oftentimes for those practices, a sale and walk away from one clinician to another clinician gives us kind of the best outcome. It also ensures that there's not any trailing metric for the value of your practice. It's a one and done transaction. It can help facilitate for those clinicians that are really done being chair side, really do want to get out of the management piece of it and are truly ready to retire. So for, I would say, a smaller practice, a sale and walk away can become an excellent opportunity. If you're still in that arena, and a merger might also be a good fit. If we're not looking to sell to one individual and walk away, but more looking to combine forces of practices, that's really where we see those merger opportunities. That's done in the same geography. Oftentimes when you have a merger with another practice, you're going to be required to stick around for 1-2 years. Sometimes we see clinicians really wanting to have that merger get out of the management aspect of it and then be able to work back clinically for even a longer period of time. The new owner ultimately needs to have some say in terms of what does that time frame look like and when are they ready to bring in the next associate. And the other aspect that needs to be thought through for a merger, because you do consolidate to a single location, is what do you do with the building, particularly if you own the building? What do you do with the equipment? Those are all very individual circumstances to think through that are an aspect of a merger, but something to be in front of as opposed to be surprised still needs to be handled. One of my models that I really enjoy for those that are ready to kind of mentor the next generation, ready to move beyond the ownership capacity, but are still enjoying the clinical work, is the role reversal. A role reversal ultimately is we bring in an associate, we start to provide them some of our patients, we slowly transition that production. We have the associate start to buy out the practice, they become the new owner, but you are then working back, mentoring the new associate, being able to provide patient care. And generally, we look at that for a 2 to 5 year period. The 35-35 rule ultimately is just stating we need equitability on both sides of that associate role. So when we bring in the young associate, if we are compensating the market average 35% of their collections, when you're on the other side of that, it's appropriate for you to expect that you're going to have the same compensation structure, 35% of your collections. A lot of times I'll see owners say, well, yeah, I'm the senior here. Shouldn't I get 45%? Well, once you sell your business, you're not. You're an associate as well. That's not a bad thing. But as long as we're working that into the financial plan, your clinical speed, your clinical ability is going to be able to provide higher production at a lower amount of chair time. So even at that 35%, you're likely still going to have a healthy compensation. Part of this role, though, is are you ready to go from captain to crew? That's often where we see the role reversal getting a little consternation, particularly in that 1 year where that 50% ownership changes. And so, make sure you're ready to go into the crew capacity, that you're ready to do some mentoring, step away, support the new owner, and enjoy providing good clinical services to your patients. One of the things that can happen in a role reversal, though, is when you have that associate come in, if they are increasing the value, providing more patient flow, having a value up front allows us to be able to make that an equitable transition. An associate should not have to buy back the revenue growth that they are providing the practice that they are getting ready to own. The next is a partnership. Partnership is very similar to a merger, and it's kind of the hybrid between a merger and a role reversal. But because you're going to have two owners for a period of time, making sure that you have a production-based compensation for both of those owners for the period in which we're going to have co-ownership is where we have equitability in terms of the clinical compensation. Then once we get past that clinical compensation, the profit is going to be distributed based off of the percentage of ownership that you have, particularly if you are in an S-corp structure, which is more often than not the common structure for kind of a multi-owner practice or even a single owner practice. It is one of these where in a role reversal, you see kind of more of a shift of what that patient looks like, that access to patients. In a partnership, it needs to be a partnership from day one where both partners have access to the full of the patient base. But similarly, we want to have that appraisal up front to make sure that as we bring in a partner, they're not having to buy their own growth. And part of that too is make sure you have an understanding of the sale of the second half. So we kind of come in as a partnership, you sell half of your practice or a portion of your practice, make sure you have a defined outcome for selling that second half. So those are the more kind of clinician to clinician sale models, transition models that we see in dentistry. Kind of the current talk of the town now is the DSO, private equity, corporate dentistry. So we'll kind of dig into that from a kind of how are those deals valued? What are some of the risks of those deals? What are some of the opportunities of those deals? Yeah, and the other aspect that I want, kind of everybody on the call to know, it gets a lot of, kind of breath in the room. The private equity, it very much is what people are talking about. Based off of the ADA's most recent surveys, currently 14% of dentists are associated with the DSO. So this is certainly not the largest portion of the transition market, but it is significant. And it's significant because you're likely going to be tapped on in terms of have one of these conversations. You might see a term sheet. And so what I really want to make sure people understand is what will you be paid for your equity? What will be your roles and responsibilities after the sale? We had talked about a 10-year lead time. A lot of private equity deals have financial incentive for the owner to remain in the practice and managing the practice for the next 5 to 10 years. You leave before the time frame of your deal, you will leave dollars on the table. How will you be compensated after the sale, right? You're really going to be working for the DSO. You are going to be an associate. And there's a lot of times that we'll see kind of upside potential, depending on the, clinical work that you're doing. What does the collections look like? Having a good, deep understanding of that ultimately is going to help you maximize the deal for you. And then, of course, are you ready to be an employee? It's that kind of captain to crew. When you're doing a role reversal, you've got a lot of opportunity to talk to and coach the new captain. In a private equity DSO deal, that is going to be significantly limited. Are you ready to be an employee of the DSO entity? And do you agree with them from a clinical standpoint, from a managerial standpoint? Really kick the tires to ensure that it's a good fit, not just from the financial aspect, but for all of that work back time that you're going to have. Because once you're in this deal, you really want to see it through to the finish line. Before we get into how is your practice valued and what's it worth, did want to just pause and say, like, maybe that's not always the right question. The structure of your sale. So what are you selling and when can really help you keep more after tax if it's appropriate for your clinical desire and for your transition outcome. So if we have a sale and walk away, you're going to get that all in one taxable year and move on. If we do a role reversal, you are likely going to get proceeds over multiple taxable years. There's some different ways that we can structure a sale to be more tax efficient. The longer it is to get the value of your practice, the more risk you have in the deal. But the better the tax outcome. The shorter, the more certain, but possibly the worse the tax outcome. As Chuck had mentioned, there's transitions costs that are going to be involved in this. That's a good thing. You want to have professionals as a part of this deal. Having the right professionals and paying for good professionals is going to be a lot cheaper than making a mistake when it comes to selling your practice. Tied to the structure of sale, what are the tax consequences? Private equity can oftentimes bring in some creative tax approaches to it, but even in a traditional sale and walk away, the majority of the value of your practice is going to be treated as goodwill, is going to be taxed as capital gains. Understanding how that can be maximized really is going to be helpful to you to make sure you keep the majority of the value of your practice. And then, of course, time value money. The value of $1 today is higher than the value of $1 in the future if we are going to invest that for our financial plan. That lets us kind of say, like, all right, better to have more dollars up front, less risk on the back end, because as I mentioned, anything that we have in terms of the elongation of really seeing the value of your practice will create some financial risk in your financial plan. So as we think about what model fits for you and are you ready for an associate, really want to make sure, how many active patients do we have? Do we have enough space for an associate? Do I have an opportunity with hospital days to really kind of move my production to more profitable cases, bring in somebody younger to backfill in? How many new patients are we seeing? Are we growing as a practice, or is it time to sell and hand off that growth to somebody else in the future? Do you have enough operatories to really be able to facilitate the transition model that you want to do? If it's a sale and walk away, 3 ops is not going to be an issue. If you're getting into a transition, a role reversal, 3 ops is going to have you and the new doc really running over each other and no ability to have the hygiene that you need to support the profitability of your practice. Do you have the right systems in place to be able to hand off a practice to the next generation? And is your staff well trained? Is your staff going to be able to maintain that patient care through a transition? So some of those pieces to kind of keep in thinking about when you think about what model is right for you, what resources are needed to support that strategy. And of course, how do we maximize that after-tax proceeds so that it really fits within your financial plan? So once you kind of start to think about what model works for you, next want to really touch on briefly how our practices valued. So there's really 3 ways that we see practices being valued. There's the top-down, which is going to be a collections-based model, a bottom-up, which is really looking at the free cash flow from operations, and then the DSO, the EBITDA model. And you'll see that I use EBITDA in quotation marks and even do so when I'm talking about it, because it is likely you have cash-based accounting and that you are not using GAAP-accepted financial statements. So EBITDA is really more synonymous with free cash flow from operations. And we will touch on just briefly some of the kind of adjustments you make to a P&L and what else needs to be taken into consideration when you think of how a DSO might value your practice. But starting with the two traditional models, the top-down model ultimately values your practice on collections. The single owner, single doctor practices, this is a really clean way to look at what is the profit potential of a practice, knowing inside the P&L, there are going to be opportunities for the new owner to make some changes. This is a 3-year look back process with the most recent years being higher valued. So if you're on a growth trajectory, that's going to be beneficial to your valuation. If you are starting to get into a lifestyle practice, that's going to be detrimental to your transition. So really knowing that we've got 3-year look back, starting this conversation 5 to 10 years out, lets us set out a plan so that we have the 3 most, kind of highest, most profitable, highest collection years when we look to have this valued and sold. The historic market multiple based off of that 3-year collections trail is going to be between 65 and 85%. Recently, it's been closer to the 85. We're starting to see rates come into play and a little bit of competition come into play, but it still very much is on the higher side of that. Opposed to the top down is a bottom up. If we have more than one clinician, if we've got multiple clinicians, one of the things that we want to get down to is what is the practice operating profit? This again is going to have a 3-year look back with the most recent years being valued. So again, we want to sell at a sprint and at our most profitable, not at a lifestyle. There will be a normalization of your profit and loss statement, right? We do want you as a business owner to be able to appropriately take advantage of the opportunities you have as a business owner. What are we doing with your 401k? Do you have a paired qualified plan? Do we have some family members on the staff? Are we using auto deductions? Are you using continuing education to support some of the travel and mix a little personal and pleasure? Those things should be normalized down. And oftentimes when we're doing that valuation, that Chuck and I, if we look at a P&L for a dental practice, we'll be able to ask the right questions. We know what the normal cost looks like. All right, if we see something that's a little bit out of line, let's make sure we know if it's a personal expense. If so, normalize that out of your profit because that just pushes more dollars to that operating profit margin. Every dollar that gets pushed down there, we have a nice multiple on it. The historic has been 1.5 to 2.5. So every dollar of profitability that makes its way down to practice operating profit, we get a nice multiple. So that P&L normalization can generally be a really good process for the seller. This is where, kind of Saf was talking about how do we present our financials in a way that really makes sure we get that value maximization. When we look at these two traditional models, as you saw as we went through this, I was using the exact same P&L. You see how these two numbers really totally overlap with each other. That's not on accident, right? If we see that there's a misalignment in there, there's likely an opportunity for us to increase the value of your practice by ensuring that we get the P&L correct and we're looking at some of our benchmarks and are we truly being as profitable as possible. When you go into one of the first 4 of the transition models that I discussed, this is likely going to be how your practice is valued. This last one, private equity, the EBITDA model. Right now, it looks a whole lot like what we saw for that bottom-up analysis. We're going down to the bottom of the P&L. Now you see I've added a line in there, and it's an assumed collections for clinical compensation. When a DSO buys you, they are not coming in as a clinician. They're coming in as an owner. They know they are going to have to compensate you as the clinician for the work back, and then any new associate. The cash flow they're buying is the profit of the practice post clinical compensation. There is no consistent definition of EBITDA, and there is no consistent application of what that clinical compensation looks like. Those 2 areas, along with some of the trailing aspects on the term sheet, become some significant negotiating opportunity you have as a seller. Now, remember, you got that 5 to 10 year work back. Remember, you're going to be an employee of the DSO. There's a lot of other aspects to consider outside of the financial. But as Asaf was talking about when it was, how do we negotiate these types of deals? Well, we can sit down with a clean P&L and come up with a wide range of value based off of what do we want to receive when, and how do we define clinical compensation. That EBITDA model, the average market multiple is 4 to 8 times. So every dollar we push down there, multiply that by 8, and that's what that practice valuation may look like. Now, with the private equity model, the DSO model, there are additional considerations than what we see in the traditional approach to selling your practice. Are you selling the practice? Yes, but you're also likely selling that 5 to 10 years of profitability. Understand your compensation is no longer going to be as healthy as it was when you were an owner, but that's why you get some of that cash and that value up front. How are you receiving those proceeds? Cash at closing is very safe. Equity shares on an equity roll, you then have a concentrated position in a illiquid, closely held entity. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you sell your practice, you're only going to have one chance to do it. Make sure your financial plan can carry the risk of having that concentrated position as a part of your portfolio. What will be your salary for the work back? And do you have any debt that you carry along with that entity, not just the equity side? Back to the non-cash considerations, are you ready for that change in role? Are you ready to go from captain to crew? Are you ready to go from owner to investor? And do you understand the sources of risk? You are going from a single practice to being a group of practices. That group of practices, oftentimes you have some financial outcome that is associated with that group of practices. Are you comfortable in terms of understanding that risk and how that fits into your financial plan? Private equity deals can be a really great outcome. One of the areas that has given me concern over the years is the asymmetry of information. Private equity understands the term sheet, but they don't understand dental care. The clinician is a great clinician, truly understands dental care, but this might be one of the first private equity deals that they're investing in. And not only are they investing in it, they're investing in it with the proceeds of the sale of their practice. Really being able to bring together Chuck, us working with your personal wealth advisory team, connecting all these different dots and really laying out for a clinician who's looking at a DSO deal, what are the risks, what's the value, and what does this look like? One, to Asaf's point, can provide us a better outcome from a negotiating standpoint, but two, also can ensure you know what to expect on the other side of the deal. Where I see these going sour is when an owner sells and then they're surprised by their work back. They're surprised by what they have to do. You go back to that initial term sheet, it was all laid out, but quantitatively, not qualitatively. Having your team being able to help connect those dots really make sure you know what you're getting into. And that's where we see these really as a positive outcome. So that really brings me to the end of the dental transitions. What are the models you have and how to value the practice? I know we're close to the top of the hour, but wanted to try to get through there as quickly as possible so that we could have a little bit of time for some of your questions. So hand it back to you guys, Chuck and Charlie.
While Charlie and Asaf are unmuting, a couple of questions I have. I know if you have questions, you can put them in the the webinar here, and we can answer them for you. Or if you could send them, we'll answer them if we end this webinar. That range of multiples is very a lot of times when owners see that, they automatically go to the 8. They automatically go to the 85. They automatically go to the 2.5. And the reason that there's a range is because there's risk with every practice, and how much risk can dictate where you're at on that range of multiples. So if you're a well-oiled machine, you might be at that higher end of the range. But to just blindly apply 8, I see this all the time, or take the median of that, you could be drastically overvaluing your practice. So assessing risk, assessing financials, and then that's where having the right team in place, where if it's a lower multiple, what can we do as a group to enhance that multiple and the financials? Because that's the easiest way to enhance the value, is decrease risk, enhance your profitability, collections, EBITDA, cash flow. You do those both simultaneously, you exponentially enhance your value.
Also would want to make the comment, when we insert practice values from a financial planning perspective, not from the transition perspective, but when we're looking out 10, 15 years and say, okay, how does this fit into your financial plan? Universally use the lowest multiple that you see. I have never had a clinician complain that they got more for their practice than anticipated, and now they can spend more in retirement. The flip side, though, doesn't hold. So plan around the lowest, do everything we can in terms of the value maximization. work with, your advisors in terms of that negotiation. But, different ways to view that range to make sure that what you have as an owner and as a clinician is really the most positive outcome for you possible.
It's also why it's so important to start looking at this earlier and plan ahead, and not just basically come to the point that you're ready to sell and you don't have time to do some of these enhancement strategies that you guys were speaking about before. And for example, at a time like this where we've recently had the sharpest and quickest increase in interest rates that we've ever seen, that affects valuations because DSOs, for example, they use leverage, and so if their debt is more expensive, they will not pay as high of a multiple. So we've seen that recently. Now, at some point, interest rates will come down and valuations will come back up. So again, another consideration, but that gives you time to enhance the value of your practice and increase your EBITDA to create a potentially higher sale price later.
And Tom, we have a client now that we're working on that we didn't even show the EBITDA values because they're never going to go DSO. So why give them a value that they're never going to get through an external sale or a transition, role reversal, all those other ones, but the DSO process. So we didn't even show the EBITDA multiples because they're never going to get to it because that's not the multiples that you're going to get through those other types of transition. And the last thing I'll say before, because I know we're right at the top of the hour and we're going to keep it to an hour, is I could tell you horror stories after horror stories on those 5Ds. I had a dentist that started having tremors at 56 years old. I mean, that's a pretty significant disability to have when you're practicing in this type of industry, and his value went completely down. So don't wait until the 5Ds. Be proactive. Reach out to anyone on this panel. We would be more than happy to have conversations.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys for speaking. Appreciate you taking the time. And again, any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.